Perfect. So right now, if you've got any questions, please either drop them in the comments or DM them to me, whatever you would like. One second. Tech challenge here for sure. All right. So today we are going to cover if you're a buyer and you're looking to purchase a tenant-occupied property, what you need to be looking for when you do that. This is Bravo. This is our foster kitten right now, and he is absolutely a handful. So we're going to try to work through him. So one of the first questions I get from someone who is looking to purchase a tenant-occupied house is, why are there no pictures? And I understand it as a buyer. Before you see a house, you want to see what the interior of the home looks like and its condition, kind of get an idea of what the layout is before you take the time to go over there and see the house. And believe me, the listing agent wants that as well. But the law, especially here in Florida, does protect the tenants, and they give tenant rights, and the tenant is not required to have their personal belongings photographed and put online. I mean, they're not the ones who have asked to sell the property, so they don't have to do that. So the question always is to the tenant, would you mind if we did photos of the interior of the property? And if the tenant says, no, I'm not comfortable with that, then the answer is no, there will be no photos online. Now, the multiple listing service does require that there are exterior photos. So they do require 3 exterior photos of the property. And so you will see at a minimum photos of the exterior of it. I've got one literally right now that we're doing in Orlando. Of course, the tenant does not want interior photos. So we are going to get exterior photos. We're going to get some drone photos and show it where it is in the community. But that's just where it's at. So no, you're not going to be able to get any photos. No, the agent is not going to be able to get you those photos. And no one's going to be able to go over there and record it for you and then send you a recording of it. And when you are visiting the property and you need to share it with a family member or a friend who is maybe not able to be with you, you will also not be able to record the interior of the property because they have rights. The other thing is sometimes the property does not lend itself to having good photos. Some tenants do not live there as an owner would. And so even if a tenant does give us permission, most often the property doesn't show well in the photos, and that would be a disadvantage to the seller. But usually I will tell you 9.9 times out of 10, a tenant will say no, just say no to the photos. So that is why you're not going to see any kind of photos in here of the tenant's property. Now, are there any questions that you may have? If you don't want to ask them and you don't want people to see them, that's totally fine. I get it. And you'd rather that you want to DM me or contact me privately outside of that, I'll be happy to have that phone call with you. So you're not put on the spot about having the questions on there. So the next question that I see is, how do you see the property? This is very frustrating for all parties involved. How do you see the property? In the state of Florida, the requirement is that the tenant is allowed to have 24 hours notice. So the communication will go to the tenant and it will say, we would like to show the property tomorrow at 4 p.m. And the tenant has every right to say no. Just because someone is asking to see the property does not mean that it is a good time. It is not a good time for them to show it, and they're not required to. So let's say maybe we've had situations where children are home and they're sleeping, or they may have an animal that is unable to be secured, or they work a night shift and they're sleeping at that point of the day. Whatever it is, the tenant is allowed to say no. We've also had situations where the property is close to a college and the students were studying that week because it was exam week and they needed to study, and it was just a flat out no. Could be that they have family in town and it's just not a good time. So I get that for some buyers, you are visiting from out of town and you are only in town for a day or a few hours and you need to get into that property. Unless you have planned ahead, you are not going to get into that property. And I understand that many times, like I'll even have buyers in the car and we have seen everything. We have seen everything that's out there and they're still not being able to find what they want. And so all of a sudden they will change their price range or they will change their area that they're looking. And so now there's a property that pops up that they're like, can we go see this? And the answer is absolutely, you may not go see that property because we can't get permission in time. Now, is a tenant allowed to withhold reasonable showing requests? So many times we'll say, okay, we understand exam week. How about we see the property on Saturday? So a tenant is not allowed to constantly say, no, 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 and just make it so that the property is never allowed to be shown so that then the property is never sold and then the tenant doesn't have to leave. So a tenant at some point will have to say yes. Now, can an agent force the issue? Yes. Yes, an agent can force the issue. I said that 24 hours notice was required to be given. So an agent can post notice that the property will be accessed and it will be shown on a certain date. We don't like to do that because the last thing you want to have is a fight with a tenant because the tenant lives in the space. So if the tenant makes the property so it's undesirable when when a buyer comes through and they maybe make like a foul smell in there because they cooked something that was just very, very smelly, or they are making the place messy. I have shown properties with drugs, alcohol, and pornography everywhere, and it was very undesirable. So some buyers you can see past that, but other buyers are like, this is horrible. I don't want to live there. And people would text me and be like, oh, do you know what's on the counter? I'm like, I can only imagine what's on there. So we try not to get into a pissing match with the tenant because they can make it very, very uncomfortable for all parties. Now, there is one situation in which I represented the seller and the tenant never responded to communications, never answered the door. And so we were forced to have to put a lock on the door. And I would have to go and post notice on the door, as well as text and emails that would notify them that someone was coming by the property, and that person was usually me. And I remember one time I was there, I'm knocking on the door, I'm ringing the doorbell, and I'm literally watching the entire family sitting on the couch watching TV, completely ignoring me, 100%. They did not want to move. And so I had to let myself in. It was like I was a ghost in the room. I was like, hello, I'm here to show the property. So sorry to bother you. I gave notice that yesterday we were going to come by, and they just sat on the couch as if I wasn't there. They watched TV. It was so awkward. The buyers did go through the house. They took a look at it. Again, awkward. They left as quickly as possible. They did end up buying it, and the tenants did leave, but that's how uncomfortable it can be. But again, tenants have rights. We do have to give notice. They are allowed to say no, but they're not allowed to withhold showings just because they want to show them. And then we can get into a situation in which we will go ahead and access the property, but it is undesirable to be in that situation for all parties. So are there any questions so far on why there's no pictures and also about notification for the tenant on access to the property? Okay. A little bit more on that. What some of us try to do is if we have a tenant occupied property and we're trying to work with the tenant is we will ask them, let me know what dates and times are best for you. Can you give me like one date during the week that's in the evening? And can you also give me like one day during the week that is during the daytime? And could it be possible you could give me a date on the weekend? Now, no tenant is like, well, I want to reserve every Saturday from 12 to 2 for you guys to come by. And we may not even have a showing on that Saturday, but they don't want to commit to that. But we do ask for it. What we also try to do is we try to have an open house because that way at least we can bring as many people through as possible. So if we have like 6 people wanting to see the property, but the tenants are like, no, I need to be home to show the property, we'll say, hey, look, we've got Tuesday at 6 to 8, and then we've got Thursday from 10 to 12, and on the second Saturday of the month, we have got a 12 to 4, and give them some opportunities to see the house then. It's not ideal, but it is as sometimes the best that we can do. So hopefully if you are an agent, you're setting that up, but you're still at the mercy of the tenant and what they're going to allow you to do with that. Now, if you got any comments, drop them in there, and I'm trying to keep up with them. Hey guys, I'm so glad that you joined. Next question that we have, this one always makes me laugh. It is not funny, but it does make me laugh. And the first question a buyer will ask me is, well, can I kick him out? Can I kick him out? Like, I want to buy the property, and once I buy the property, I want to kick him out. No, you are not allowed to kick the tenant out of that property. And that is every tenant's worst fear. When the property is going on the market, the first thing that they ask us is, are they going to be able to kick me out? Especially when you're dealing with a family with children, or you're dealing with a member inside there that may be ill and they're going through some things. Students are very stressed out about it when they are going to be like, am I going to be kicked out in the middle of finals week? Because they don't want that. So the law protects them. And if you are going to buy a property that has a tenant in place, you as the owner, you're going to take over the lease and all the terms and conditions that go with that lease. So if you are someone who needs to move in, like right now, we have a lot of people that want to move into the property before the start of school. So they want to be moved in by August 1st or sooner. But the tenant lease doesn't end until July 31st. And so they will ask us and say, well, can we go ahead and move in early July? Just ask them to leave. We can ask them to leave, but they don't have to leave. And you want to be very careful when you're looking at a property in which there's a tenant in there, and read the information, because that lease may actually be going until 2026. So you may see July 31st on there, and you're thinking it's July 31st this year, and you'll go ahead and close on the property and you'll move in right before school starts. No, they probably have already signed a lease for that person to be in there until next year. And so you want to know, when does the lease end? Hopefully the listing agent has put it in public remarks so that it saves time for everybody. And it should say on here, the tenant lease ends, and then you note the date on there. This is especially important to know if you're getting a loan. That's going to be really, really important to know. And I'm going to go more into the loan part of that. So no, you cannot kick them out. You must honor all the terms and conditions of the lease until the lease ends, and you want to know when the lease ends. The other thing that I would caution you that you want is, you want a copy of the lease, because you don't know when the lease ends. They may have put something in there that says, oh, the lease ends July 31st, but they got confused when they were typing up that description, and it was actually for a different property. So since you're going to be taking over the lease, you want a copy of the lease, because you want to know what the terms and conditions are. It could be in there that I can't even remember. Maybe you don't want pets in the house and they've got pets, or they are not paying for utilities and you are taking over the lease, and now you're going to be paying for the utilities. So you think you're getting $2,400 a month in there, and you're like, okay, well, that's going to cover my mortgage. But you don't know that you've also got to pay for the pool, you got to pay for the lawn care and all these other things. So you want to know exactly what you're getting into when you're taking over the lease. You also want to know what the security deposit is and what the monthly rent is, because there may be no security deposit, and you might be having damage to the property that once they move out, you think you're going to get the security deposit and take care of it, and find out there isn't any. You also want to know if they've already paid last month's rent, because when you go to closing, you're going to need to make sure you've got all that money, so that when you close and they move out, you have to give that money to them. You can't say, well, your previous tenant, the previous landlords got that, go get it from them. Because once you close, it's yours. Good, bad, it is absolutely yours on there. So, hey, the next thing is the loan. Yes, the loan is going to be an issue. So if you are like a VA or an FHA, to qualify for that, it has to be your primary residence. And if you've got to move in inside of 60 days of getting the closing on that property, but the lease is not going to expire for 3 months or longer, you can't buy that property. So and please don't try to do mortgage fraud, because they're going to find out, because they're going to say, hey, the property is tenant occupied. We need a copy of the lease. They'll find out that the lease doesn't expire for 4 months. And they're going to be like, how are you moving in early if this lease goes for another 6 months? And they're going to catch it. And so you don't want to be into a situation where you have paid for the inspection and you've paid for the appraisal and you've paid for the survey, only to find out that your loan is going to deny you because you can't move inside of 60 days. Now, if you're doing a conventional loan, you may have to get a different, you'll still do conventional, but conventional does have a different interest rate and a higher down payment if it's going to be what they call either an investor loan or investment type of property. So they'll say, well, it's not going to be your primary residence. That's okay, but we're going to need more money down. And it could be 15% down. It could be 25% down. It's going to depend on the lender that you choose. That's going to determine how much more money they're going to be wanting from you. And they're also going to change the interest rate. The best interest rates are going to go to owner-occupied properties. So you're going to have to pay a higher interest rate. So it may be worth it if you really, really want that house and you're going to go conventional loan. You can do it, but just be prepared for the higher expense that you're going to have with it. And that's all you want to do, is you just want to be informed in there. So you probably will not get qualified if you're going for a primary loan product, but you are not going to be the primary resident inside the next 60 days. And so you need to switch to the investment loan. So, okay, let me make sure, do I have any questions in there? Okay. Yes, you can absolutely DM me if you've got any questions and you don't want them to be on the screen and you would prefer that they be private. Or you can call me and we can just have a conversation on that. Okay. Next one is, we just went through the loan and the move-in timeline issues on there. The next one is the property condition. Whew. Okay. It is hard to evaluate the property's condition when a tenant is in there. They may have things that are blocking access to where an inspector is going to need to go in and do some inspection. And so the tenant may or may not want to move it. The inspector is not going to move it, rightfully so, when they don't want to break it. And two, it's literally not their job and they don't want to injure themselves. So it can cause some issues there. Also, sometimes it causes issues when it's not spelled out clearly what belongs to who. Usually we see this with like microwaves and refrigerators. Sometimes washers and dryers. Like you may see a microwave on a counter there and find out that you think it goes with the house, but it doesn't. Lots of times washer and dryers, they are the tenant's property. So you're going to want that spelled out, because you don't want to have them inspected on the inspection report and then find out that they're not included. So why did you even have them looked at anyway? So you want to make sure that you know what is included and that it is inspected to make sure it's working. And then access to things are difficult as well. And some tenants just leave the home in poor condition. I mean, it's not that it's not working. It's just that it's not clean. And so you may think that things aren't an issue. Another thing with tenants on inspections is the property condition, like let's say carpet. If they've got a lot of stuff on there, it may be hard to check the condition of the carpet on there. And then when they move everything out, you'll see that the carpet is either stained or it's buckled in a lot of areas. And you're like, I didn't know this when I bought the property, and the tenant's still going to be there for another 6 months. So you basically are a landlord. And if things are damaged, you can take it out of the security deposit if there is one, and if it's a large enough security deposit. The tenant may have a problem with you. I call it dinging them for something. So let's say the tenant moves out, the yard is a mess, an absolute mess, and you need to get it mowed and cleaned up. so that you can move into it and have it look nice. And you think you're going to bill the tenant for it. And you say, okay, tenant, there's a $500 bill to clean up the yard. The tenant's going to go, but that's the way it came to me. And unless the seller or the property manager who was managing it gave you photos, you don't have any proof that that was delivered in good condition. So if you two end up going to court, the judge and the attorney are going to say, all right, do you have any documentation that the property was delivered in a different condition than it was left? Because the tenant is saying, that's the way it came to me, and I returned it exactly as it is. And so it's not fair for you to charge me for something that is going to be better than what I got it. And so unless you've got documentation to show that you can actually bill for it, you're not going to win. So I wouldn't bill for it. So when you are buying that tenant occupied property, you want any documentation, especially with property management, of photos of what that property looked like before they moved in. Now, I do property management. We photograph every property. Like, we photograph like crazy every property to make sure we know what the condition is. And when I have an owner who's selling a property, I turn over all those photos. So that's going to be between them, because I'm no longer managing it. So that's going to be between them at closing on what they want to do. But if it's you and you're the buyer and the owner is the one taking care of it and there's no photos, don't plan on being able to charge the tenant for the condition of the property, because you have no way to substantiate what you're saying, and you're probably not going to win. And the last thing that you want to do is end up going to court and losing with attorney fees on that because you don't have your documentation. Okay, that was a good question. Next question that we get is, and this is fair, can you negotiate for early access or them leaving? Again, you can ask them whatever you want to ask them. They can say yes and they can say no. So a lot of times I will have a buyer that will say, well, go ahead and offer them, ask them what they want to move. It's something that normally never works out, because the tenant will say things, and they have the right to say this. They will say things like, okay, well, it's inconvenient, so I want to charge for my inconvenience. The rent at the next place is higher than I'm wanting to pay here. And so it's $100 difference. So I want you to pay the $100 difference as well. And so they just start adding in these fees on there, basically for their inconvenience, and putting them out. And so they'll say, yeah, I'll go ahead and move early for $3,000 extra. And of course, the buyer's like, well, that's ridiculous. And I think it is. I agree with you. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. But you are asking them to vacate early for your convenience, and they can say no. And if they don't say no, they're going to charge you for it. Some of them want to have you help them with moving cost. Very, very fair, but you can ask, but you cannot make them leave. And you cannot make it difficult for them. So if you are buying a property that's tenant occupied and you do not know Florida law, you are a landlord now. You better get real familiar with tenant law, because you're going to be responsible for it. I tell some people that are buying tenant property that, get a property manager, even if it's just for a few months until the end of the lease, so that there's a separation between the two of you, especially if you do not know the law. And all of a sudden you're getting a call on the weekend that says, hey, the toilet's clogged, you need to take care of this. And you're thinking, no, I don't. Well, you might have to take care of it. If it's the only toilet in the house and the toilet is clogged, it is now an emergency and you need to take care of it. And they may call you in the winter and say, hey, the heat's not working anymore, and you are not answering your phone because you're on vacation. You've got a problem, because that's an emergency. In Florida, you are not allowed to let people freeze to death. And so there are timelines on which things need to be dealt with. I had a situation once where, AC is not required, but if you've provided AC and the AC goes out, AC is now required. And we had a situation where the AC went out. All the AC was going out. It was in the summer. That people were backed up on getting AC providers out there and getting units taken care of. So it wasn't unreasonable to be like, hey, it's going to be a couple days before they can get the AC taken care of. But here's the thing. This was an emergency because this person was on oxygen. And so this is the kind of stuff you've got to know if you're going to take on a property that's got a tenant in there, whether you're going to become an owner of properties where it is tenants, or you're even going to have a short-term situation in which you're going to have a tenant in there for just 2 or 3 months while you're waiting for them to move out. So get very, very well versed on tenant law to make sure that you do not get in trouble, or make sure that you hire a property manager to keep you out of trouble. Will it cost money? Yes. But I will promise you it is going to cost a lot less money than it will be if you actually get sued and end up in a fair housing violation situation, because they assume you are guilty and you have to prove your innocence. Whereas anything else, it's like you're innocent and then you got to prove you're guilty, but not fair housing, not housing at all. They make a claim against you, you are guilty, and you've got to document and show everything that you are not guilty. Well, one, because I know, because I'm in property management, but I did have somebody make a fair housing violation. They did not win. I had all my documentation, but if you're not somebody who does that normally, it can be frustrating, it can be scary, and it can be very, very costly. So that is what I have for buying a property with a tenant in there. And some of you might be looking to purchase a property with a tenant, and that's totally fine. All this stuff applies to you as well. I think one thing I would say, if you're specifically going into it, is let's say the property, the income, I said this earlier, is like, let's say you're getting $2,400 a month in rent. You are going to have a mortgage on there that is $2,300. And you're like, okay, it's $100 difference. At least I'm making money, right? But by the time you end up paying for a property manager, or you don't know that there are bills or things included in there that you now have to pay for, then you might actually end upside down on there. Usually I see what ends up happening is that in a tenant-occupied property, the mortgage usually does not cover the tenant's income, the tenant's rent on there, and you plan for the fact that, hey, you know what, you're going to have a couple months that you're upside down. If you know that going into it, you'll be better able to navigate the negotiations. So I've got a situation right now where the seller has to sell a property. It's an unfortunate situation. The seller must sell. And they just signed a lease for another year. So we know VA buyers and FHA buyers are out. And the only thing we've got left is a conventional buyer that's going to have to get an investor loan. So their interest rate's going to be higher and their down payment's going to be higher. The mortgage is not going to cover the rent. And in the rent, the $2,400 that they get a month, she is also paying for property management, the pool service, and the lawn service. So whoever the buyer is that's going to come in is going to negotiate hard and say, well, wait a second, why am I going to pay this much for the property when I'm going to be short each month, let's say $300? So that's going to be impacting the price that they're going to offer for the property because of all the conditions that are with it. Even though the house itself is fine, it's in a great area, it looks good, it still has those conditions that are going to get rid of a lot of buyers in there. And somebody asked me, okay, short-term rentals. Short-term rentals, if you're buying a property that is a short-term rental, those are really hard to show. I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. Those are very, very hard to show because the short-term renter may not know that the property is up for sale. And so imagine this, you're the short-term renter, you check in, you are planning on sleeping in tomorrow, maybe even running around the house naked, having a bunch of family and friends come over in the afternoon for a party. Like, you've got plans. And suddenly you got a call that's like, hey, there's going to be a showing tomorrow. No, that short-term renter may say, well, you know what? I'll go find another place to stay. You can go ahead and keep it. And the owner doesn't want to lose that income. So a lot of times when you are doing short-term short-term renting and you're wanting to see a property that's a short-term rental, it's going to need to be like Monday through Thursday because it's usually booked on the weekend and you're not going to be able to see it. And if it's a very, very busy, good working short-term rental, it may only be open like to a couple days a month, and they may have to block those days for you. So you'll definitely want to plan much better. If the listing description says this is a working Airbnb or this is a working short-term rental, you'll need to definitely plan out in advance and probably ask them to block a day or two so that you can actually see the property. Now, yes, because it's a short-term rental, they will be able to cancel all the future bookings after you purchase the property. So in that situation, you will be able to move in as soon as you want because they will have canceled those reservations, and they are able to do that. Now, if you're like, but no, I don't want them to cancel the reservations, I want to keep it as a short-term rental, then you either need to already have a host account or get a host account in advance, because you can't just transfer the bookings if you want them. The short-term rental company, Airbnb or VRBO, is going to have to do that transfer for you. Now, the other thing is you don't have to keep those bookings. You can decide that maybe you could get more money and have all those bookings canceled, and the previous owner is going to have to deal with that. And you might decide that you're going to put it on the market at a higher price and get more money for it because you're going to completely change things around, maybe paint the inside and up the nightly price on there. You can absolutely do that. So you've got options when it comes to that. On your loan for a working short-term rental, your conventional loan's really not going to work. You're going to have to get what we call a DSCR loan to get the correct valuation on there, and it's not probably going to value right. If you've got a seller who knows what they're doing and you come in and you're going to say, I'm going to get like a conventional loan type of thing, they're probably going to say no to your offer because it's not going to appraise out, because it needs to appraise on income, not the value of the house as if it were a sale with an owner living in it. So, or a long-term renter living in it, because the incomes are not the same. But there's more information on that. Hold on one second, since I got a question. Hey, it's nice to see you too. So that was a great question on the short-term rental showings and reservations and cancellations on there. But if you've got any questions that are deeper or more specific to your situation, by all means, let me know, reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any of those questions that I can, and they don't have to be public here. They can absolutely be private. So I hope that helps, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week.